Yeah, I know. I should probably turn my phone off now.
Oh yeah, I got my.
People keep calling asking for money.
Turn my phone off too.
Here we go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 531 with a big echo in this room. Live from Green Turtle Bay. Asterix, we have, let's say, we've got a popular Culver Street and Asterix. If you'd start us up, it would be good.
Okay, we're going to do two of my all-time favorite funny stories. The first one, the guy goes into the fish store and talking to the manager. And they have some problems, and he said, my mind hasn't been working well, just foggy. The guy at the fish store says, I have the perfect food for you. Fish heads. I got the perfect kinds of fish, too. He says, well, I'll take some. How much are they? They're $4 a head. So he sells them, 4 of them, $16. He comes back a week later, I don't know if I'm doing any better. He sells him 4 more, another $16. He comes back 2 weeks later and says, you cheated me. I could have got the entire fish for only $2. The guy said, see, they're getting smarter already.
Yeah. Still happy.
Having some issues behind the scenes, just a little technical difficulty.
This is my last resistance. It's during the French Revolution, the guillotine, they raise the blade up and they pull the lever and it comes down and slices people's heads off. So the first guy, he's falling out with the right revolutionaries, and he's a priest. And they raise the blade up and they pull the release rope and it's stuck. And the priest says, see, that's a sign from God that I'm not supposed to die. So they let him leave. Another guy comes, he's a lawyer. They pull the blade up. And again, the release rope is stuck. He said, that's double jeopardy. You can't try me twice. I got to go free. They let him free. And then Mr. Doofus comes, and he is very mechanically oriented. So he's in there, and they pull the release thing, and it jams. And he says, wait a minute. I know what you're doing wrong.
Try again.
And so, I'm going to call stupid. Okay. We're going to talk about partners for anti-Semitism, whether they're primarily demonic or human, part 2. Even if we all know the answer, I think it's good to thrash it out and discuss it, especially in today's world. Because things are, would you have expected things to go this bad, this fast in America, of all places? It's kind of a shock.
I don't think a year ago you would have considered the kind of demonstrations and things that we're seeing across campuses and other sort of pushback, or even the sort of wishy-washy official stance that we're taking on what's going on right now. That's a little hard to imagine, but there it is.
And I think the hatred for the Jews doesn't fit normal human bias or xenophobia. So we're going to go through normal reasons for hating an ethnic group or race. We're going to go through them and see basically how it doesn't fit. It's just being a normal, ethnic hatred. The first one is economic reasons. They're better off than we are, so we hate them. That's kind of normal thing. They got all the advantages or whatever you want to say. Um, and they are accused of being financially more successful. By the way, you know that in most of the history of Europe and even in the Middle East, Jews were not allowed to own land because that was the normal source of wealth. So they became middlemen. Well, they got to be very good at it. But that really can't explain it. That really can't explain it because between the 17th and 20th century, Jews and quite a few Jews in Poland and Russia were dirt poor. And guess what? They still had pogroms. They still hated them. Actually, in certain parts of Russia, they've had anti-Jewish riots even this past year. So it's not completely gone even to this day. The no riots are over the Hamas war, but it's the same hatred. So you can't blame it all on that. Okay. Could you read the first scripture of Matthew 24, please?
Sure. Sure, let's go. It is. Then shall he deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake.
I read that scripture and I thought, nations, that doesn't sound like the church only. And it really isn't. I think somehow when Christ said you be hated for his name's sake, they hate the Jews. And in a way, Christ predicted that. But they also hate the church, which is, by the way, if you read the book of Acts, the church was considered a sect within Judaism for many, many years. So they kind of lumped us. It was a sect that was unpopular with the leadership, but it was still a sect within Judaism. So they hated both the Jews and the church. And I think it's because this is the devil's society.
But another way to read this is all nations, but that terminology can also be all nationalities, all peoples. So it doesn't necessarily mean every country in the world, but it means all kinds of people, all races, white, Hispanic, all the colors. We come together on this one thing of the hatred of these people. This is not a very good feeling here. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you. Nobody wants to hear that. But so I don't necessarily think it means just every nation, but I think it means all kinds of people.
And but you are blessed when you go God's way. Hey, but you also make an enemy of Satan. It's like you get blessings, but you also get an opposition. And the Jews are the preservers of the Bible. The second one is the chosen people. The Jews have always claimed they're the chosen people, and the Bible backs that up. They in Israel are the chosen people. You know that in the 20th century, there are a lot of Jews in Germany. The Yiddish that a lot of Jews speak, it's just a mixture of German and a little bit of Hebrew. It's kind of a off-brand dialect, kind of a German. There are at least there were a lot of German Jews, and many of them kind of, tried to get denied their closeness with Judaism and the Bible so they could be, with the other Germans. And what the Nazis did? They had special investigators. They think you're Jewish. Whether you look it or not, you know what I'm saying. Well, a civil Jew, they all know it because of the way you dress and stuff, but for a lot of Jews, they couldn't tell. So they actually had people investigate it. If you had one Jewish grandparent, you were in the cattle car.
It's reminiscent of the Inquisition, where people are, you're trying to hide, your diet, or you're accused of choosing something over pork or something like that. And you're trying to blend in essentially to escape that persecution, to go the way of everything else to get away from it.
Years ago, I was watching the Jewish television network, and they went to a service, and I was watching the service, and they had a rabbi, and it was more of a reform service, and Somebody raised her hand and said, "What was God doing during the Holocaust?" And she looked pretty lost. And finally, she goes, "He was crying," but she had no answer. And so I went to a Jewish friend of mine who speaks Hebrew and reads and writes Hebrew. He's a very educated man. I told him the story I just told you. And he said, "That's not the question. The question is, what were the Jewish people doing in Germany before the Holocaust? We're held to a standard. If we did not meet the standard and we turned our back on what we had been taught from our youth, then God was going to punish us." I thought that was a very interesting answer coming from that particular man.
I've got a book at home written by a man who grew up Jewish, and then he's old now. The Holocaust happened. He was young. Most of his relatives, a lot of them were taken to the gas chamber, and he is bitter against God. And I don't know the other Jews. There's not much you can say because it's hard to. It's such a horrible thing. What can you say, right? It's one of those mysteries. But his answer was they forsook the covenant, right?
Pretty much. Pretty much. He said they were acting like the Jewish people. They were eating unclean. They were not keeping the holy days. They were working on Shabbat. They were not doing anything they were supposed to do. They had blended into the German society and were doing quite well. Felt blessed because they were making money and they were doing well. Well, then God pulled his protection from them, and the German people decided something has to be done because we're not going to be subservient to these people. And it became became the Holocaust. So many of the Jewish people who I know now have not forgotten that, and they're very, very active in their synagogues and really glad to keep their traditions. And then others, they go, "That's what my family used to do." They have no interest. It's kind of a big separation between the two.
Well, I was not there, but my wife and dad went to see a letter stuffing machine at one point in time to see if that was something we could utilize. The salesman was Jewish and, talked about it, played it up because, we keep the Sabbath and holy days and all that. And it's common grounds. And they went out for lunch afterwards and it was shellfish and all that. And my dad, of course, pointed out, he's like, you're eating this stuff? He's like, "I thought you were Jewish." He's like, "Oh, my mom would kill me if she knew this." But, it's just it's a lax attitude. I think that's, it's a warning for anybody who takes their faith seriously, who considers the Bible seriously. That circle of God's protection that we have to stay inside. It's the same for everyone. Like, it's not just specifically for the Jews. I mean, maybe people in the church see that more clearly because so much is the same, and we don't dismiss the Old Testament and many of God's laws, the expressions of His will, very plainly and straightforward. As much as maybe nominal Christianity does, but the circle is the same, and staying close to God and not being a hypocrite. One of the things that Christ condemned most vigorously. It's utmost importance if you expect God's going to see you through the hard times.
You're correct. I agree with you. Blessings are the blessings. I don't agree with. I'm gonna pick a religion, just to pick one. We'll say the Mormon religion. I don't agree with a lot of their dogma. However, they're very good about people getting off of drugs and alcohol and marriages staying together. Well, the blessings are there. God blesses them for what they do correctly. So I don't think it's just a Jewish, non-Jewish thing. If you obey, you'll be blessed. So also you have trials. And if you don't get trials, at this point in my life, if I wasn't getting tried by something, I'd wonder why have you forsaken me? I'm also getting up and getting kicked. I'm not getting kicked when you're forsaking me. So I think that we should always stay close to the trunk of the tree. And the trunk of the tree is what's commonly called Judaism. I don't personally think it's Judaism. I think it's true Christianity. If Christ was the Messiah and he was the one who said, "Let us make man in our image," and he was the one who wrote the Ten Commandments on the mountain, then actually that was before there were Jewish people. The laws were long before the tribes of Judah and the others came. The Sabbath was the Sabbath when it was called man. I think it's no difference. So I think the blessings are the blessings if you obey.
One thing that's interesting, Judaism is not the only church with that exclusive thinking. Catholics say if you want salvation, you have to be in the Universal Catholic Church. Muslims say the same thing. Actually, I don't know what they say, but if you're an infidel, you're in trouble. Well, they're not have not been heard over thousands of years. So the fact that you say and other religions as well, you're the chosen people, does not explain it. I do sort of have this thought: if you're, say, Jewish and you're keeping the Sabbath, or you're Christian and you're keeping the Sabbath, a sign of God, you're an enemy of Satan, and you need to keep your protection up. You know what I mean? By staying close to God.
Now, I am going to say that the Jewish people are at older rates than the religion of Islam. So it's hard to hate them for 6,000 years when that's only been around since, I think, the 6th century. But if we look at now, in almost 6,000 years, we could have hated them that long too. Just a thought.
That's true. Would you read Numbers 24:9 for us, please, Ken?
Sure. He bowed down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you. And then Zechariah 2:8. To the nations which plunder you, for he who touches you touches the apple of his eye.
Obviously, there are a lot of ways you can look at it, but one thing seems to me that for those countries that attack Jews or Sabbath-keeping Christians, they're also attacking the apple of God's eye. I know that sounds weird when you say we are the apple of God's eye, but in a sense we are. And let's just look at Germany, for instance. The country that had the greatest loss of men per capita was Germany in World War II. And every German city, at least the center of them, got bombed to rubble. So they were not blessed, and they lost a ton of territory. They were not blessed. In some ways, you would say the same thing for the Spanish Empire when they did the Spanish Inquisition against the Jews. Well,
What about Russia? There were influxes of Jews fleeing to the Holy Land in the 19 teens and stuff like that, and that's right at the time that look at what happened to their society and getting ground under the heel of communism and where that took them. Inside of the same time frame.
The Russians weren't blessed for their persecution of Jews either. There was another way. I think it's what's the famous Jewish guy that's on TV? His name on top of my mind. He's a lawyer.
It's not P.V. Herman.
He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer. He said, and also
Mark Levin.
Also, of all the nations the Jews have ever migrated to, wasn't a little bit, but America, much, much more so. They got more acceptance here, more religious freedom. Actually, it was so bad that a decade or two ago, Jewish movers were worried about half of their young people were marrying outside of Judaism and leaving because it was so well accepted. Well, if that's true, that America has been the kindest to the Jewish people in the last 200 and some years, hasn't America been blessed?
That is so interesting you did it, because before World War II, my understanding, and I'm not a historian by any means, my history is how did I get here now? But the British Empire was not against Israel. They were helpful to Israel, and they were greatly blessed. World War II, they were decimated, which some were they had to turn everything internal, take care of themselves. And we stepped up, not easily, but we did step up and start helping the Jewish nation. And many of the Americans of Jewish history went to Israel to fight and protect it for the Holy Land, and look at the blessings we've got. I'm really concerned that if we don't do something and stop what's going on with the anti-Semitism in the country, that those blessings are going to go away. and we're going to pay a dear price, and our children will.
People don't know this, but in 1948, when Truman was going to, because America was in charge of everything, was going to force the United Nations to recognize Israel as a state. Our State Department and almost all our allies said, "Don't do it, don't do it." Truman had the courage to do it anyway, and I think America was blessed. This may not be quite the same. Even when Donald Trump moved our embassy to Jerusalem, which is kind of pro-Jewish, when all other presidents had promised, but the pressure from the outside, they'd always back out. I think that also got America a blessing. We were blessed for at least a few years after that. I don't know what's going to happen now, so I can't say too much. But
I'm reading Zephaniah. It says that Gaza basically will be a barren wasteland before the Messiah returns. And so I think it's kind of a thing for us to watch because Netanyahu says it's not happening again. He's enough's enough. The World Criminal Court is trying to bring charges on Netanyahu for war crimes. They would really hate me because I would fix this thing in a day. But the it looks to me, just guessing, that Gaza is going to come completely apart at this point and not come back together as we have known it, and possibly not come back together at all.
we have one, the liberal in Netanyahu's unity government, Gantz, quit because Netanyahu would not decide this early how they're going to run Gaza after they win. But he's not going to commit to anything until they, I'm assuming, destroy Hamas. And I think it's a blessing for Israel that he's prime minister, not that other guy, not the liberal one. I'm giving my opinion, of course. I think he's determined enough to stand up to the world and even the Biden administration.
Yeah, well, my Avon lady will stand up to the Biden administration. Um, I mean, I'm not afraid of. Um, we are a laughing stock right now in front of the world. We are so weak. We've done everything backwards, everything wrong, and the cursings are going to come. I mean, we left what was it, $8.5 billion worth of equipment in Afghanistan, which now the Taliban is selling or delivering to Hamas. So some of our own equipment is going to start showing up. And I heard something the other day that some of the stuff we sent over to Ukraine is starting to show up in Gaza. So everything is backwards. And
Corruption in Ukraine, I can't believe it.
well, they were the number one, as I understand it. This is my understanding, but they were the number one human sex trafficking country in the world. I don't know of anybody, any real stats on that, but that's what I'm told. And so why would not the Biden boys want to protect themselves from being discovered over there?
That's why Hunter went there, huh? I should take that back. I think.
That was a question. It's a fair question.
That's just a question. Um, the third reason is scapegoat. Because generally, when things go bad, you look for a scapegoat. Uh, the problem with that as an excuse to explain anti-Semitism is for a scapegoat to be chosen and effective, it has to be someone that's already hated or looked down upon. That's why they're often a scapegoat because they're already hated. Um, um, by the way, Hitler ran it and raved that the reason they got stabbed in the back in World War One it was the Jews. But just a lot of people were anti-Semitic, and he stirred it up. They made a good scapegoat, but that really doesn't explain it um, because they had to be hated over a long period of time to make a good scapegoat. And Satan loves that sort of thing. It's like hate's like poison. It hurts the people who and take it in, and obviously it hates the people that they persecute. Satan loves that.
Yeah, his game plan hasn't changed. It's the same now as it was thousands of years ago.
You and him hurt each other, right? Or something like that. Um, and here's one that this affects some Protestant ministers, even great men like Martin Luther. You probably don't know this because it's not well known that once Martin Luther came to power, and a chunk of Germany was a was in Lutheranism, the Lutheran Church, and he was a big wheel in that area. He demanded that the Jews accept his great insight on grace and convert to Christianity. Well, the Jews, they know the Bible quite well. The scriptures he brought was no great surprise. By the way, if you talk to Jews, they know the New Testament. They know it quite well. And it was written by Jewish people. They know. So Martin Luther was shocked they wouldn't convert. Well, he started persecuting the Jews. And he helped get, I think, a lot of the anti-Semitism into Germany way back, was that 1540 in that period?
He had a horrible retirement plan, though, Martin Luther. His retirement plan really stunk. I mean, he burned for 3 days in a pit. So I'm thinking that trying to get people to hate the Jews is probably not the way to have gone. And the Catholic Church is the one, after he nailed his grievances to the door, they threw him in the pit. But it took, I think, it's 72 hours for him to finally give up the ghost. So bad retirement plan.
Yeah. But however horrible his death was or wasn't, it's clear that uh, some Christian, and I know this for a fact, but I won't mention churches or names because they're out of trouble. You talk to some Christians, Protestants today, who they won't say they hate the Jews, but they say, we blame the Jews for killing Christ, therefore they're bad. But that's like giving a green light to anti Semitism. And you would be surprised. There'll be a lot of preachers that you think are nice, pious, holy men, but they've been taught that. So let's look at the biblical truth. If someone were to ask you, who killed Jesus? The answer is all of us. He died, well, for all mankind, but, at once, but individually we'll all partake of it at one point in history or not. And God had a plan. All those 109 prophecies in the Old Testament about Christ, no bone would be broken, and they'd gamble over his outer garment, all the stuff that we know of. Uh, it was there. Christ came into the world to die. Um, so we're the reason he died. Has nothing to do with the Jews. That just happened to be where it all started, of course, but that is not the important thing. Could you read John 18:10, please, Ken?
Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?
And if Christ were here right now, he would say something like, forgive them, Father, they know not what they were doing. By the way, just for the record, you know that Christ was very popular with the Jewish people. He was like a rock star of his age. He was so popular that his problem was often crowd control. He had to run off in the mountains, cross the lake, we'd go around certain villages because there were just mobs of people that loved him. It was the leadership.
The other statement is that people, I think, overlook in the scriptures when Peter chopped off his ear, he missed. He was trying to take his head off, and he ducked. Yeah, and he ducked. So the real spirit here was Peter was going to just take your head off. Which brings me to it's kind of an off subject, but he had been with Christ for a long time, years, and never did Christ say, throw away your sword and just turn your other cheek and take the beating. There was a time and place for turn the other cheek, but um, he carried that sword, and Christ never said, don't defend yourself, be a wimpy man. In fact, he says, if a strong man answers the door in the middle of the night, surely the thief would be turned away. So Simon Peter was a strong man. He was impetuous. Um, some things I've heard is that he may have been African descent, not African American, African descent, meaning a black man. Um, how awesome will that be when we get to meet him? We find out who these men were and what they really look like.
One thing about Peter, of the 12, wouldn't you agree he was probably the bravest? The others ran off and hid. Peter trailed along. And even with a big mob where he was outnumbered, if Christ had said to the other guy he had a sword, let's all put up a fight, Peter would have kept on fighting. But Christ, here's a thought. Why did Christ go to the Mount of Olives, which is one of his favorite places where he knew Judas would take the mob? If Christ did not want to die willingly, he could have gone somewhere where Judas had never been with the crowd. In other words, Christ came to die.
He could have said, "Never mind, forget it. They're not worth it." I did my best. I tried. These people just will not ever obey. They will not be what we thought they would be, what we hoped they would be. Um, he could have just scrubbed the whole deal, but he chose not to. For people who will not obey him, for people who 1,000 years later will say he never existed or it doesn't matter what he did or said. He did this for people who were never born, and once they were born, will never obey. There's no deeper love than that. And that's when he says, "No greater love than this that a man lay down his life for a friend." How about laying him down for somebody who hates you? And he did that as well.
Um, by the way, the Vatican Council eventually in 1963 changed their doctrine and officially exonerated the Jews. Um, for, so they're not saying Christ killed anyone anymore. But oddly enough, anti-Semitism is still alive. And what's surprising, it's growing again. Like a cancer is coming back.
140 campuses. What I heard on television today, 140 campuses are having these anti-Semitic riots, and the Jewish students are being told, "Stay in your dorms and just do everything online. Don't go outside where you can get hurt." That's
Instead of shutting it down.
instead of shutting it down. I personally would walk straight out that door in a kippah. That's just me, but um,
Well, you're tough enough that you could probably
no, I'm
do it.
not. I'm
A
just
lot of
not going to
people
put up
probably
with
could.
it. As tough as I was when you met me.
This guy is a karate expert. Has his own karate school. But I do think the authorities, many of these blue cities and blue campuses, they're kind of anti-Semitic too. That's why they don't do enough to put down the riots.
Yeah.
And the media is kind of anti-Semitic too, depends on which network you look at. But uh, it's terrible. Would you read out the next two scriptures for us, please, Ken?
Knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot.
And you want to read the next one as well. Might as well get both of them together. John 3, the famous John 3:15 and 16.
All right. That whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
So Christ came for us. By the way, notice it says should not perish. It doesn't say will burn forever and ever in hellfire or any other kind of fire. It should not. So in other words, if you're not saved, you just perish. You're gone, but not the heaven and hell myth as it goes. Um, so Christ died for all of us, and the Jewish leadership was the ones that really hated Christ, and I think it was just raw jealousy, don't you, Ken?
Yeah, but they were afraid to lose their power. They didn't want to lose their power, their money, and all that sort of stuff.
Envy can be a terrible thing, right?
Their position, just like politicians today. They don't want to lose all that power. They like it.
I'm worried about what they might do if they think they're going to, anyway, lose their power. I worry about it, but I guess time will tell. We shall see. Um, The fifth possible excuse is they're outsiders. With the Enlightenment of the 18th century, many Jews did assimilate uh, throughout Europe and many other places. So, with that much assimilation, anti Semitism should have stopped, right? But the Nazis cried things like, "We hate you, not because you're different, but because you're trying to become like us. We don't want you in our bloodstream." In other words, you can't win either way. They um, and some Jews, this is a true story, as they were being put in the cattle cars in the 1940s, they would say, "Look, I fought for Germany in World War One." And SS guards and others, we don't care. Throw in the cattle car anyway. Because people wonder, why do many Jews say they have to have their own nation, give their own security? Because they learned the hard way they could not really trust anybody. In a lot of countries in Europe, the French, the Dutch, some Spanish, Italy, Austria, I could rattle off a couple more. They cooperated in feeding the Jews to the Holocaust machinery.
I've trained with Israeli commandos, and that scripture in Genesis 49, it says Judah's a lion's whelp. They take that very seriously. They take that the way they do things, the way they train their people, the mentality is so different. I've trained with Japanese and Koreans and Chinese, and the Israelis, their mentality is so different. They when they say never again, it comes from deep inside the core of their being, and they mean it.
I heard this somewhere on the radio. They predicted, by the way, from the infantry standpoint, the most dangerous warfare is urban warfare. In other words, if you're an army and you're fighting urban warfare, the easiest thing is to stand off and let your artillery blow everything up, and then come in after you blow everything up. But if you won't or can't, or it's unadvisable to blow up all the civilians, you go into an urban environment. Think of all the ambushes. And they said if the Jews went into these, it's very urban Gaza, they would lose a ton of soldiers. But they haven't really lost that many. They've done surprisingly well with all those tunnels, and I think um, there are countries in the Middle East that are actually frightened by Israel's success.
They are. And one of the things that they're complaining about now is that the Israelis, when they got the four hostages last week, that they went in dressed and acting as Palestinians. The Palestinians didn't know they were not Palestinians, and they were able to go right in there and get them. Years ago, the Israelis, they had a situation in Syria, and they had the Syrians had surrounded, I believe it was Syria, had surrounded the Israeli embassy, and they went in and emptied that embassy out and took them through the crowd, and the crowd never saw them leave. So they are the newest ninja of ninjas, and when they tell you that they will go in and take people out, whatever they're going to do, they will. And like I said, I've trained with them, and their common guy is so much more skillful and knowledgeable than anybody else I've ever seen. It's crazy.
It could be, I think Netanyahu's trying to set an example as well. So the other nations think, oh, no, we don't want to do that. Oh, well, we could kill a bunch of Jews and celebrate for a day like Hamas did, but then we'll have to live with the consequences.
Well, they look at it like this. I'm going to give you kind of a story. I had a student, and I'm talking 30 something years ago, that went to a martial arts event, and one of the girls said something about another lady, and my student said, "Oh, she's very good," and this girl cussed her out. And I went over and switched the papers around so that the next fight was my student and that girl. Well, my student beat that girl like a rug. Next tournament we went to, the girl came up to my student and said, "Are you fighting today?" And she said, "Yes." She says, "I'm going home." And she picked her stuff up and left. The Israelis want to beat them so bad, the rest of the world goes, "Don't bother them." They want to show you that they are a lion's whelp, and it is not worth the fight. So the psychological part of that is huge, and they've got to defeat them so badly. The rest of the world has to rethink. The only option then would be the surrounding of Jerusalem by multiple nations.
I heard a guy that this is off the subject, but it's interesting. He was saying that he believes that they will build the third temple someday, and it may be quite a ways off. He says maybe what will happen is this united Europe, the beast, will make a deal. He'll say to the Jews, I'll guarantee you're protected, probably both diplomatically and militarily. Go build the third temple, and I'll be your ally. And the Jews will make the deal, thinking this guy can be trusted. There's a certain logic to that. And then, by the way, I'm giving you a little bit of history. And then, like Antiochus Epiphanes, stab him in the back. One of the things Antiochus Epiphanes did was he was mad because the Romans had roughed him up. When he came to the Holy Land, all the Jews who were unfaithful to their covenant, he used what I call the secular liberal Jews to help him undermine the religious Jews. And then, of course, he stabbed everybody in the back and desecrated the temple. Is it likely that some parts of that pattern could happen in the future?
Yeah, it's very likely because history repeats itself. I mean, it's there's only so many ways to do things. I mean, I don't understand why we get shocked when things like that happen because it's always happened.
It's true. Um, and this is one that probably doesn't make much sense, but number six is they hate the Jews because they're racially inferior. Um, I know the Nazis pushed some of that in their terrible propaganda, but if you're being honest, and I went to school a lot of Jews, both in public school and college, I only had one Jewish student I knew who was a bad student. And that's because he was a year or two older. He had survived the concentration camp, came to America as an orphan, and his brain was deprived of protein during key growth years. And that's why Abe didn't do very well. But all the other Jewish students, they're the wizards of the class. They dominate most fields like law, science, medicine, and some others. And then the opposite happens. Some people hate them because of their talents and gifts. Like you can't win. Is that weird or what?
Well, it's pretty much prophesied. I mean, there's not much we can do about it.
Yeah. It's contradictory.
And
And
to the blessings and the cursings, I mean, if you take the Bible's advice and you raise your children in the way that are right, and you care for them and teach them the truth and teach them about the world, I mean, think of the foundation that you're giving them to go forward from there and to succeed. Whereas, those that don't have that basis to operate from, it's a tremendous blessing. Even just the even in a non-spiritual sense, just the practical side of it is a tremendous blessing.
Blessings are the blessings.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
and by the way, the racial thing is one more thing. Um, I know there are two basic lines of Jews, some from the North African Middle East line and one from the European line. They look a little different, but also they're Jews of various races. If you watch movies, anyway, you'll see some are dark skinned and anyway, some are light and blonde but so you really can't pin them down racially that much. Maybe to a certain extent, but there are a lot of exceptions to that rule. And
My
a lot of people don't know that.
my Jewish friend was telling me that they had a rabbi who was a black man, and somebody got real upset, thought it was a joke, it wasn't for real, and they had quite the whatever. And this man was a rabbi, and he was Jewish, but he was a black man. And they went to his synagogue, and they were happy to have him do the service and stuff. But others thought it was some kind of like it can't be real, it's not true. But
Didn't Netanyahu's older brother die? And if I get the country wrong, but it was either Ethiopia or the country Somalia next to it. There are a bunch of African, dark-skinned Jews. They all of a sudden were being persecuted, and Israel rescued them. And I guess thousands of them were were sent to Israel and probably are still there now.
There's a lot of Ethiopian Jews that are in Israel. I thought it was Uganda. I thought it was right on the
Maybe it was
tip.
Uganda.
I think.
Yeah. One of those countries in that, most were in that Horn of Africa area. So that's something to think about. And the hatred is not within the range of normality. That's kind of what all six of those things add up to. That it's an abnormal hatred, and I think it's straight from the demonic world because I can't see any other explanation for it.
There can't be. And here's my thought process. You take two, 4 or 5 year old, three, take 5 or 6 or 7 little 4 or 5 year old children, you put them to play. Nobody cares what color the other kid is. Nobody cares if his shoes are different or if his hair is. Nobody cares. They just want to play. If they do care, that's coming from mom and dad or some adult somewhere else. Because children are just going to be children, and God's children would be the same way unless there's outside influence. My opinion.
And I think demons are the outside influence because I believe one thing the the laws of the Old Testament and some reinforced and elaborate on the New Testament, the laws of God are like an irritant in this Satan's world, Satan's society. And I think that they can't laugh God's laws off because they're too immutable. And I think there are a lot of secular people in this world who hate the Jews because they're the people of the book, the people that gave us Jesus Christ and preserved the laws of God. And I also think they hate Sabbath keeping Christians as well, because our beliefs are like an irritant too to the world. Because if it were just something easily falsified or just some silly idea they could laugh off, but they can't laugh off God's laws that easily.
Some of my Jewish friends they laugh at Christians. They go, "You are not a Christian. If you were Christian means to be like Jesus. Well, Jesus was Jewish. So why aren't you keeping the Sabbath, food laws, holy days? If you were really a Christian, you're really like him. That's what he did. So you're not even telling the truth about what you are. You're some pagan diversity, whatever. But a true Christian who's trying to do what Jesus did would keep the Sabbath, food laws, and holy days, bare minimum. And I think that's really fun. I've got that from 3 different of my friends. Um, and they don't hate Jesus at all. These three don't. And I've had others who disdain the name because they think Jesus tried to destroy the Jewish people. That's what they've been taught. But these three in particular, I thought it was really funny because it was different times. One was a year or two before the others. And he said, a Christian meaning act like Jesus, then you would act like a Jewish rabbi.
It's a sort of a funny way to reverse engineer it. You know, if the demonic realm can get people to hate the Jews as a people, you know, for and maybe ostensibly for a lot of these other reasons that are thrown up, these here and now reasons, whatever, whichever one we've covered many that could be thrown up as proof at the time. Well, really, by extension, you're getting those same people to hate, you know, the law, to hate the Sabbath, and to hate the holy days, and then you're kind of putting that off, like, ah, that's what those people do. Like, I would never be anything like them, so then you know you're trampling all on all this truth from God at the same time, making it less accessible.
Yeah.
I saw on the radio this Messianic Jew was being interviewed by a mainstream Protestant preacher, and he said, I've accepted Christ coming the first time. He said, you've gone from being a Jew to Christian? He says, no, I don't have to give up my Judaism. I can keep the same Sabbath and the same holy days and all the Jewish traditions and still accept Jesus of Nazareth. And of course, he's right, but the Protestant preacher was shocked because he doesn't know that Christ did all that. And so did the New Covenant Church.
Yeah, sometimes it's taken as Christ's criticisms of the religious elite at the time or taken as a criticism of everything that came before, and that's not it. His criticisms were of areas where they had gone overboard, where they had transgressed the law in its intent and in the way that it should be kept, not against the thing in and of itself. That's a distinction that's not always made.
My concern with people is when they come into the churches and they learn about the Sabbath, it's almost to the point that they worship the Sabbath and not what the Sabbath is about. Um, and the Sabbath is not a burden, it's a blessing. I know as a kid, I grew up in the church, so there were times the Sabbath was a real burden for us. We couldn't watch TV. We had to lay on our beds after we came home from services. The only thing you do was study your Bible or lay in your bed because you're going to rest. And that didn't happen forever, but there were periods in time when my mother was doing her best to try to do her best by us that she overdid it. And nothing in God's law should ever be punishment. It should be love and fellowship and all of those things. So when new people, and I meet new people, they come in and they're all excited and they've got all this zeal, and they overdo. It's almost to the point that they worship the Sabbath, the day, as opposed to God Himself. There's got to be a
Well,
balance.
then when you first get into the church, there's a learning curve. I mean, if you spent, 30, 40 years out in the world, you're adjusting to something that you've never done before, and you don't, you want to get it right. That's one for the people that come in from the outside after living a good part of their life. That's what they got to figure out. And the further along you go and you're learning, you start to realize that it's not about, what you were talking about, not about worshiping the Sabbath, but it should be a blessing and you should enjoy it. And yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
good intentions can still take you to the wrong place. It's possible.
You know,
exactly.
I look on YouTube and I see some of the Jewish people dance, including soldiers, dancing and singing. I think they even do some of that on the Sabbath. That Hava Nagiva. You know the kind of thing I mean. I think maybe they're. It's like singing to God as part of worship, and I guess we probably don't. Maybe in churchianity in America, we don't really fully get that. Well, at least some of us don't. Singing and rejoicing on the Sabbath. That's kind of what I mean.
No, it's a Sabbath should be a feast day. There should be a time when families come together and best friends from church come together, and you go to their house. And there was a long time as a kid that my mother's best friend was a lady in the church, and her kids and her husband, they came to our house, and we all had lunch together, and we played outside, and we threw balls at each other, and they let us be kids. And the Sabbath was the only day that we could do that. The rest of the time we had to go to school, and we had chores, and we had homework, and the rest of the week just was terrible. But the Sabbath, we could.
Chores.
I'm not one to run from chores, but most kids are. But for us, it was a day that none of that had to happen. It was, making some kind of sandwich and eating potato chips and getting soda, which we never got. It was a time and then cutting up with our friends, and it was a really special day. And some of the men sometimes would come and they'd bring their guitars and they would play church songs, and we'd all have a sing along. And the Sabbath became a really special day, and I think that's more in line with what God would want us doing on the Sabbath, making it a feast day.
Yes. Wish we had more people and live closer together, could do more of that. But yes, I agree a lot. Would you read John 7:7, please, Kim?
The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. If you keep my commandments, you will be abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you.
And I think we just have to realize that anything that marks you, like the Sabbath and annual Sabbaths and God's laws and or the Jewish people who are known as a chosen people, you automatically are hated by the devil. And if the devil's world, it's sort of like Hollywood. I think the people who get the breaks to get to be, not all, but many of the stars in Hollywood, don't you get the feeling that if they were really, really good Christians, they would have never made it in Hollywood?
No, Hollywood had no use for those people. Yeah.
It's probably getting worse. The more perverted you are, the better chance the world will give you the platforms, right?
Hmm.
That's kind of what I think. And most of all, the nation of Judah gave us Jesus Christ. And by the way, Christ was born in the line of David. That's even more in the Bible, Old Testament, and it's one of the important things. Well, you can imagine. When I think of David, I think of David maybe being 16, laying on his back, guarding the sheep at night, and the sky is all full of stars, and he's got his lyre, kind of like a guitar, and he's singing great songs to God. And God hears that and sees that, and there he says, "There's a man after my own heart." Well, that's the kind of person the devil would hate the most, right?
I think that a lot of this comes because with accepting the Jews preserve the written word. And that means you have to accept a certain morality. And the world does not want to hear morality. That's wrong. You can't this, you can't that. That's not acceptable behavior. And that's where I get myself in trouble because I blurt things in front of people, not knowing that they're on the other side of things, and they get real upset over it.
It might be good for him.
I don't really
They
care.
don't usually take it that way.
No, they don't. But the point is that you know what one generation will accept, the next one will embrace. Well, then the next one, that ain't enough. It's got to be worse. I mean, we're walking through the mall and there's kids with grommets in their ears this big around and dressed like animals. And there's a Christian school, I'm told, I've never been there, that threw a kid out for not using the proper pronoun or preferred pronoun of another kid. When her father went to the school to ask about what was going on, he saw this big square box in the classroom. He says, "What is that?" They said, "That's the litter box for the children who identify as animals." And they're going to the bathroom in the box in the classroom. So he snatched his kid out of the class. Now, I'm told this by somebody I've not gone over because I haven't had my shots. I haven't gone over to check, but this is not a completely uncommon thing. It's more and more. So when you start accepting that your kid is really, a boll weevil or whatever it is he is.
Identify the.
Yeah, my
It's so full. Before.
my friend my friend calls me and he says, "My granddaughter came to visit in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. She said, I identify as a man." He said, "Talk to me next year when you identify as a walnut. Until then, eat your dinner." Um, he's much more liberal than I am. I'd have shot her, just get out of my house. Um, really identify as a man, I'm gonna treat you like one. How about that? But when one generation will accept it, the next one will embrace it. Then that's not enough, and it's going to snowball, and that's where we are. So the real crux of this, I really think, is morality. I watched the movie by Ben Stein, smart Jewish guy, Ben Stein, um, Expelled, and he goes through the double helix chain and he goes and he interviews people who are curators at Dachau and Auschwitz and these things. And it all came down to really morality. And then he went to professors, and the professor said, "Oh, we were seeded by aliens. We piggybacked on crystals, monkey drop. I crawled out of monkey droppings. I'm good with that. I think you did too. But they have every kind of anything because none of it comes with morality. When it comes down to God says you can't do that, that's not acceptable, and He'll punish you for it. And by the way, the proof is everywhere. You look at the HIV epidemic in the 80s, the proof is everywhere. Um, they don't want to hear that. Don't you tell me how I'm going to live. I'm not. I'm going to watch you die. As George Jones said, by the choices you made. Um, and that's where we are. So when I say I don't accept your behavior, well, then you're a bigot.
That question of Christians who hate Jews, and is that what Christ wanted? I mean, did Christ want his followers to hate Jews? It's almost ridiculous when you say it. We think about it. He was very Jewish. And by the way, he and Paul loved the Jewish people. Ken, can we look at the next scripture, Romans 11, just one, to prove the point?
I say then, has God cast away his people? Certainly not.
And when Paul says certainly not, that's his way of saying, are you crazy? So I would no, never any such crazy thing. And you read, uh, I actually read a lot of Romans 9, 10, and 11, where Paul talks about he wishes his people were all getting converted, and he really loved his people. Um, here's something that I want to emphasize because I think I understand it. When Christ criticized the Jewish leadership, and Paul did too, and others in the Bible, it's what I call an inside the family criticism. By that I mean, let's say if you had some bad brothers and you got on their case about how bad their behavior was, does that mean you want the whole rest of the world to hate them or persecute them? Of course not. You're trying to get them to straighten out, right? Or if it's your own kids, you would, it's an inside the family thing. Let's read Matthew 23:37, please, Ken.
O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing.
Now, when you read that, oh, he's mad at the Jews. He actually loved Jerusalem. But really, if you read the whole context, he loves Jerusalem, loves the Jewish people. He's just mad at their leadership, well, for stoning the prophets, etc., etc. But it's an inside the family thing. It's not a justification for anti-Semitism. It's the exact opposite, actually. And uh, and I think that's where a lot of Christians go astray. They think, and there are a few other scriptures in the Bible where the Jews are criticized by Christ or Paul or maybe somebody else. Um, it's an inside the family criticism, but it's not a justification for hatred. You criticize them because you love them.
I've heard the scripture used to justify it when Pilate was trying to release Christ, and the crowd said, "His blood be upon us and on our children," and that's taken as, "Aha! Well, there you go. There's some scriptural justification there." But you can't, in the context of scripture, you can't think that that's applicable because you have other things to fall back on, like the sins of the fathers don't, fall on the heads of the children. Every man dies for his own sin, and so on and so forth. And you would also consider that forgiveness was extended first, and the following Pentecost to those people who had directly participated in this act, and so it's a twisting of what the truth actually is.
And I almost think Pilate was like a witness against the Jewish leadership. He said, I'm not buying that he deserves to be executed, and I'm washing my hands of it. So the leaders probably got the little crowd that they got together to say, "Oh, we don't care. We'll handle any guilt associated with it," just because they were trying to outdo what Pilate was saying. But I think Christ and God allowed that to be a witness against them. So then the next age, they're going to have to do. I'm not saying they won't repent. I'm sure the vast majority will, but that the leadership will have to do a lot of repenting.
Well, I think some leadership don't have a chance when you guys kind of condemned them at the end there. So, but I think that a lot of, especially the people, and if you read Acts 2, and he said, you know, he starts off talking about this Christ who you condemned, who you crucified. And it says they were, torn in their heart. So some of those people already repented when they realized what they had done. But some of the leadership, when he said, you're of your father, Satan, the devil, who is a murderer, and the truth is not in him from the beginning. I have a feeling you kind of, your sentence has been handled right there.
Wouldn't want to be in their shoes. I mean, I'm not saying they won't get out of it in the next life, but they're going to have to really do a lot of tough repentance. And the last thing we want to mention is anti-Semitism is a barometer of the rise of pure evil, like a canary in the mine. Tell the miners there's gas leaking before they can smell it. Anti-Semitism ramped up the decade before World War II, which is the biggest war, at least in casualty human history. Probably 70 million people died of the war and aftermath. Not to mention it helped bring in, well, we're going to go into the communist murders after, but we'll leave that alone. The point is, as anti-Semitism rises, devilish evil is rising. And the question is, obviously, God's going to take care of that in the future, but just how bad is anti-Semitism now? I'll start with Ken. What do you think, Ken?
It's good. And since October 7th, it's ramped up um, exponentially. I didn't see this level of hatred coming out of, especially. I mean, I knew that the the schools, the college campuses were an indoctrination center for the left, and but I didn't know they had gone that deep into anti-Semitism. But obviously they had. And we're back where we were during World War II, where the Islam and the left is aligned. They were aligned then, they're aligned again. And both sides are just putting up with each other till they win. And that's their goal, to eliminate the Jews and capitalism. And once they do, each one thinks they'll take the other side out. And that's when we're going to have that's when the whole mess starts, I think.
Any thoughts on the rise of evil, Michael?
Um, well, I think there's a lot of problems in the world. There's a lot of, there's wars in lots of different places. There's a lot of financial instability, and you see governments pursuing unsustainable paths and pursuing, quote, sustainable things in other ways. And things are getting ramped up. People are at each other's throats in a lot of ways. And as problems increase, I feel like blame also increases. And I feel like a lot of it is going to end up, we know it's going to end up coming the church's way, and you could see it coming that way as an extension of the hatred for Judaism. I don't know about you guys, but I've been, oh, you do this and that, you keep the Sabbath and these things, like, oh, you're a Jew, you're Jewish, right? No, not exactly, but that's the way the world thinks, and so that blame as it rises up, if there's more and more of that, then it's coming our way too.
I just hang an Israeli flag in front of my door every day. And they,
Sure things up front, yeah.
I do. I literally
They're
do.
not afraid.
No, I'm not afraid. It is what it is. I teach an Israeli martial art, so I'm already labeled. Um, so, now I'm putting lions everywhere. So, the thing you just read about the lion and everything. Um, I got pictures of my lions. Um, I think that listen, it's prophesied. I'm going to be on the right side of things the best I can tell. I'm going to stand by Israel, and they are God's chosen people. And I just read on your notes you gave me, those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. So being on the side of a curse from a man does not bother me. Being cursed by God, that's a different story. And he says, don't be afraid of those who can kill your body, but be afraid of him who can kill your body and your spirit. Well, there's only one who can do that. And so that's the side I'm going to try to fall on. Do I have all the answers? No, I don't. But uh, I'm going to do my best to fall on the right side of this.
And then one final statement is, I know we sort of talked about already, but can America continue to be blessed if we start undermining Israel's effort to totally defend themselves against Hamas? As I understand it, we're withholding ammunition. I think that's still true, isn't it?
Far as I know.
That's what I've heard.
Until I'm assuming they want Israel to withdraw and kind of let Hamas up off the mat, what's left of them, without them being totally destroyed. And hopefully they'll get the hostages back. But I know why Israel won't accept it, because Hamas will just, a couple of years, they'll recruit more young men, get more weapons smuggled in. They'll start, and they've actually admitted that.
Rinse and repeat.
Well, in Islam, the only purpose for a truce is to regather your troops, or train your troops, replenish your troops, and it can never last more than 7 years, and you have to go back to war. So, if you understand this, and the Israelis understand Islam, um, the answer is you keep pounding them now. When they yell "uncle," that just means you're doing a great job. Give me some more. You know.
Also, they took surveys of PLO and Hamas citizens. They don't want a two-state solution. You know what they want?
They want they want Israel gone.
Yeah, they want, now whether they admit it, but Hamas admits it, they want genocide. We want them out of here.
Yeah.
We want it all. They could have had a two-state solution back in 1948, bigger than the one they have now, much bigger.
There was never a Palestinian state. That's all a lie. And I asked a girl the other day, and she didn't have an answer. I said, 2,000 years ago on Christmas, remember what happened? Oh, Jesus was born. Where was he born? In Jerusalem. So that was 2,000 years ago. That was a Jewish state. Am I incorrect? Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You just gave me Jesus, the King of the Jews, born in Israel and in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. You know, and I know they just can't reason. They can't reason at all. The girl who told, was it Ben Shapiro? Who was she talking to the other day? It was one of the others. She said Muhammad did not write the Quran. Muhammad was illiterate. No kidding. He was inbred. Of course he's illiterate. You know, that's me talking, not the church talking. And I'll own that, by the way. But Muhammad didn't write the Quran. People around him, people claimed to know him, all took turns writing in it. Aisha, his 6-year-old wife, granddaughter, wife, same thing, wrote some of that in there. It's a complete religion of insanity, and if you really read it and you study it, it contradicts itself all over the place. Ayatollah Khomeini's Little Green Book, that's a treasure. I'm the dummy that read that too. And I took time to read the Quran. A great book to read along with that is Robert Spencer's book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. You really want to understand Islam, read that book. It breaks it down to the absolute stupid. You'll never understand Islam and what you're dealing with until you understand the thought process. Just like learning another language, they put the subject first and then the action word. Well, that's that language. In English, we don't necessarily do that. Um, and so to understand the people and the thought process, you need to understand the language. The for a perfect example is homosexuality a sin in Islam? Well, you have to define homosexuality. What we define as homosexuality and how they define it are two different things. So what we would call a homosexual relationship, they don't necessarily call it that. That's boys, that's men. It's a whole different way of thinking about things. So when they say that it's a horrible sin in Islam, yet everything that we would consider that behavior is acceptable behavior. So it's much deeper than a Baptist and a Lutheran having differences. It's much deeper than that.
Well, I want to thank everybody for showing up and all the viewers.
I'm trouble
And
there.
really wonderful having David Overstreet with us again. And of course, Michael and Jen.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Everyone enjoy the rest of your Sabbath and Pentecost. And if you can get here to Green Turtle Bay, we would encourage that. We're going to have a great time the next couple of days, observing God's holy days. And we'll see you back here again next week. Good night, everybody.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.